Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security and international relations expert. But I'm just going to note the historical irony. The Jews of Ukraine, they're gathering a shelter for them and a tech for that famed town that Sholem Aleichem wrote, where the Jews had to flee pogroms. We just certainly wish them the best there. But what is your estimation right now? If it's really up to Vladimir Putin. What is his game here? Does he intend on an invasion, or is this some kind of exercise to achieve either lifting of sanctions or a guarantee that Ukraine won't go into NATO?
So that's really the big question, and that's a question that Western intelligence has been, or experts in the West has been asking themselves about Putin. First of all, he's the one making the decision, and he alone. I mean, the guy has been in power for 23 years. He was first elected in December 1999, and it is typical of autocrats who've been around for so long and have gotten rid of any opposition that nobody around him tells him to stop or tells him he's wrong. So that's first of all.
But I will do note there have been some reports about some retired generals Russian who were spoken of, and we saw that kind of bizarre, looked like stage scene between Foreign Minister Lavrov and Putin, where he sort of urges Putin to continue diplomacy.
But it is staged. I mean, obviously it is staged, and that's typical of the Putin regime, this autocracy after 23 years. So the big question now is he just bluffing in order to lift the sanctions that were imposed by the West in 2014 after he annexed Crimea? Or is he really serious about trying to undo mostly the expansion of NATO eastward, including former Soviet republics such as the Baltic states? Now, if it's about lifting the sanctions of 2014, I think there's room for negotiations, because I think that in order to prevent war, the U.S. and its European allies would be willing to consider lifting those sanctions at least partially. But if it's really about trying to challenge NATO and really conquering part of the Ukraine, I don't see any possibility for an agreement. And I think that part of his decision-making has to take into account the huge economic cost that Russia would have to pay if he was to literally cross the Rubicon, because the consequences would be huge on the Russian economy. And that's something that we don't know how serious. I mean, on the one hand, the Russian economy is very sensitive to sanctions. On the other hand, he's been piling up about $600 billion dollars of foreign currencies in the Russian central bank. And then the last point also is that the Russian army would get really a bloody nose from the Ukrainian army. So taking all this into account, it would still be a very big risk for him to do that. But again, we don't know what his endgame is.
Right. Now, you mentioned, of course, NATO. We should note that President Zelensky of Ukraine today reiterated his country's desire to join NATO. So he's not backed down from that in that visit with the German Chancellor. And he is calling for a direct meeting with President Putin, something which Putin has declined to do. It's interesting, the negotiations have all gone above Ukraine, and of course that is something the Ukrainians clearly are not happy with.
Right. So again, if Putin wants a commitment that the Ukraine will never join NATO, I think this can be negotiated, because NATO doesn't really, with all due respect to the Ukraine, NATO doesn't really need Ukraine in its alliance. And for the Russians, a very sensitive issue, because they consider Ukraine part of the Russian space.
Right.
And so it is in a way surprising that President Zelensky is saying that, because he knows that it's a non-starter for Putin, and that it is kind of inviting a Russian invasion, because that is really red line for Putin. So it's not clear if Zelensky is saying that as a way of putting pressure on the West or on Putin, but obviously I think that and you can hear also from
well, maybe he's holding it out as a card to negotiate.
Maybe
to say to Putin,
that could be.
This is maybe that we can. I have this card, but maybe I can deal with it.
When you listen to Lavrov, what Lavrov was saying before, it looks like there's room for negotiation, where he said our positions.
Right.
So it looks like if, I think, Putin would get a commitment about Ukraine not joining NATO, there would be room for negotiation. And in that sense, the statement by President Zelensky is puzzling.
Right. Well, let's see what happens in the next 48 hours, which could be crucial here. But of course, better diplomacy than a shooting war, which of course on all sides would be tragic to start with. Dr. Emmanuel Navon, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.